So I would really like you to welcome Max and Marley to the stage. Max Jackson and Marley Zada from Curtin University presenting in absentia with Anthony Kickett. And they are going to present on Reinvigorating Nyungar Boodja, collaboration and implementation of Nyungar and UDL pedagogies to rekindle desire for participatory action by Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. This session will go a little bit late because of our technical delays this morning, so please, I appreciate your patience and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Yes. Of course.
Thank you so much.
It's not very strong. Oh, that's okay.
Sorry. Oh, you're the expert. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. First of all, I'd like to thank Colin for his welcome. It's always very important for us visitors from other countries to have a welcome to come and perform business on someone else's country. We acknowledge that we're on other people's country, and I'll use my old language because, like this side of the country, our side of the country, we use the old language because our old people understood the old language. English has only been here for 250 years, so even though my language is from the other side of the country, it comes from the same foundation. It is built on the country. So kaya nunakurt nalak kuling wajak Nyungar Boodja, nungang Jurban nunung kurt nunakurt nija kulan Boodja karajan. Nungan nang morin kitrit kiji nyungan Jurban kulan Boodja bangalanga karajan. So hello everyone, we are coming from Wajak Nyungar country. We are happy in our hearts that everyone is here on the Kulin Nation to learn and share information. I pay respects to all our elders past and present who'd be happy we are all meeting on Kulin lands to exchange knowledge, because we're an egalitarian society, we share, and that I know without knowing my really old people that that's what they would like. You also want to add your...
Oh yeah, Paleta Yuku. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kai Marley Zed and I'm a Bakanji Afghan Nunku. I'm a proud Bakanji and Afghan woman. I'm not Nyungar. I just want to acknowledge that as well before I get started. I've been very privileged to be able to be accepted into Nyungar country, to be able to assist with the education of our topics. And I also just want to acknowledge that we are standing on Wurundjeri country today. Thank you to Colin as well this morning for our beautiful welcome.
Okay. All right. I suppose this came across our desk, and you know, universal design for learning. We sort of looked at it and said, this is what we seem to do. This is based on our practice, our cultural practices, which is about sort of, you know, being an egalitarian society built on reciprocity, built on it's the cultural protocols and all the other values and practices of the Indigenous sort of community is about looking after each other. It is about inclusivity. It's about building confidence. So we thought this would be a really good sort of forum to come and spend some time and maybe share with what we do, and that way we might be able to support others in what they do. So our unit is, we sort of looked at, a lot of people will go out on country to find out about Indigenous culture, but this, you know, our cities were always country, and they still are. But the difference is too that in our cities, we live next to places of cultural significance. I drive past Yellowgonga Lake, and Yellowgonga Lake is named after the first Indigenous person that made contact with non-Indigenous people. He left them thinking they were the old spirits and they looked weary, so he left them to rest. He came back, they hadn't left, so, but that's the way the culture was. And when our students drive past that place every day, we thought the confidence, the investment, all those things, we will make them stronger people and make them stronger with our our values are about being relational people, not transactional. So we looked at this assessment, and it's a pity that Uncle Anthony Kickett is not here, because he really, I did this unit before him, but then as he started to do it and really put that cultural stamp on, we really started to see some really strong sort of outcomes in regards to our students, and especially our international students, because we built this unit based on Indigenous culture, which is about family, and our international students, that's what they're missing the most: the family, the familiarity, the belonging. And so as we'll go through this unit, we start to understand how it sort of really started to create strong students, but also little communities within students, because I'm a business graduate, so I found that international students and non-Indigenous Western Australian students didn't leave the unit with really strong relationships. What we find with this is they become a little family within themselves. And I think it's because of what Anthony introduced. So, you know, our students have that two worlds colliding, and this is actually creating those safe spaces of negotiation when they engage with Indigenous people, because as myself, Marley and Anthony, we have our own third spaces. You know, Marley has to bring she does have other cultures, her Afghan culture and that. So we have to create those safe spaces of negotiation, and we try and create this with the students. The way we sort of as the foundation is the Nyungar and the 8 ways of learning. And the reason for that is because they are, you know, our cultural ways of teaching is that value-based, like I said, egalitarian, you know, reciprocity, respect, community, protocol complying and inclusivity, and it creates that belonging. But with these type of sort of practices, these practical ways, sorry, it's not a word I usually get stuck on, but you know, they allow the students to customise their engagement because there's so many options. They're multi sort of optional. You know, we go out into the country and say, engage the country, inanimate objects. How do you engage the country? Use all your senses. Feel something, smell it. It is telling you something. Feel the wind. Listen to the wind. Those are the type of things we try and get our students to move back away from that transactional process of the bustle and hustle of the big life, and actually get back to things which really that they can control, but also things that they can share and they can reflect on and things like that. So, you know, I think, you know, the really sort of supports the students, but also supports the community of the students, because we get students that really nowadays have a lot stronger identities than I think than some of us. Because me, myself, as an Aboriginal man, I had to hide things growing up. My first job, one of the first generation that actually ended up in an office, you had to leave your culture at the door. You know, we have strong non-Indigenous allies around us and activists that actually support that we can bring our culture and it can be celebrated. So it creates this community, which a lot of our students, they have these strong identities, but how do they use it in community? And these type of practices that are actually old cultural practices allow these type of things to sort of really develop and strengthen their strengths they have, but especially international students, they won't bring them here because they think the curriculum, it doesn't belong in the curriculum, but it actually, once we allow them to do that, they become very strong students. A lot stronger. Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think bringing yourself to the classroom is particularly important in this type of subject. In all, you know, no matter where you are, who you are, where you come from, that type of thing, what your abilities might be, bringing all of that diversity of perspective to this practice is extremely important for us. And as you can see, like this is using our Aboriginal pedagogy to implement part of what we know as UDL now. We had actually not heard of UDL before coming here, so we were actually a little bit relieved to hear that our previous presenters are quite new to this space as well. We're very much the same in the sense of giving it this particular title, although this is something that you know, our people have been practicing for thousands of years. So I think that getting beyond the traditional classroom setting really allows the students to engage in a way that they haven't had an opportunity to do so probably in the past through their typical mainstream learning journey. And I think getting outside of the classroom as well really does allow the students to stay engaged with the topic. We only have them for 7 days. This unit's run between our semesters in a winter break, so it's an intensive course. And so because it is so full of information, and it is quite hard, as you guys I'm sure can appreciate, to sit and listen to lectures all day, every day, getting them outside and being on country in, as Uncle Max said, not just you know, being 2 hours away from the city and thinking that a non-built up environment is on country, quotations, air quotes, and you know, allowing the students to see that there is very much still country as we know it under these big concrete juncles that we live in now. Yeah, it allows that sustained effort.
Yeah, and I think it's like one good lecturer, one good tutor, one good unit develops confidence that actually then transitions across other units. I actually run an intro to Indigenous Australian studies, which is every once a week for a whole semester. I don't get the same outcomes because the students are distracted with other units. The students go away and they've lost before they come back. So the 7-day intensive between semesters works a lot better because they actually are, the motivation, the investment is really strong because they don't have these distractions. So that's sort of the way we do it. You want to talk to the...
Yeah, so I guess, and I guess in terms of the how-to, this is just one of the ways that we like to explain what we do, giving visuals to some of the complex concepts that we apply as Aboriginal people. Our good old spiderweb analogy. If we have a look on the outside, you can see that there is a red dot on the outside of the spiderweb, and this concept of yarning is really big in Aboriginal culture. I don't know if anybody's heard of that term before. We don't go from A to B in a conversation. We'll add in bits and pieces and we'll tell a story. It is a journey while we go through our learning. And so we might start out here on the side and we'll go straight for a little while, but we'll divert off to the side and then we'll come back and eventually we get to what you guys know as the point of the conversation, right? But it is coming. So if you end up in a yarn, please be patient. Everything that you need to know throughout that process is being given to you for a specific reason. It might initially sound like, oh, where is somebody going with this conversation? But there is a point to why you're hearing about that. And it really does speak to the interconnectedness and the intraconnectedness of our culture, knowledge and practices.
Yeah. So this is a bit of a map of our 6 seasons, which we have in Western Australia. But what it is actually the template too for also, because our local country is also an educator, it's a teacher, and it's getting the students to understand that. The protocols are actually the key to this. So when the students leave, if they understand the protocols, then they know how to engage country, then they know why to engage country. These type of things really sort of become the foundation for the student learning, but also the student development, that confidence with engaging Indigenous people, because quite often these international students, non-Indigenous students, as we'll see in a later slide, there is that divide. There is that understanding that we are all, you know, whether it's stereotyping, we are all a certain type that we cannot engage in a rational way. So by building this up, we sort of develop the confidence, and the confidence of comes from the education and the understanding. You know, it has that engages psychologically, physically, on all different levels. So the country becomes their teacher, and it's that ongoing sort of relationships that we try and develop where they can go out and actually become comfortable in actually engaging the country themselves when we're not there, or engaging our communities when they need to engage our communities. And this is what's created so many problems over years, is not having people, especially in positions of power, not actually being able to engage the community and understand what's needed. We spend tens of billions of dollars on business background, so the amount of waste comes from this, you know, it's crucial to have stronger Indigenous people that understand Indigenous culture in positions of power.
I think that the other benefit of just displaying this for you guys as well is not just so that you know what month it is in Nyungar country at the moment, which you can see on the outside of this particular figure, but it's really about getting the students to contextualise their learning. It can be quite easy for us to say, yes, all Aboriginal people love to have a yarn, but we are not a homogenous peoples. There are over 250 different language groups, and so we localise it, we contextualise it, and that's really a part of our Aboriginal pedagogy as well, is to learn in situ, and that's also part of that retention of information, is to go out on country, learn about a particular thing in the place where it is, so that you can actually remember part of that information as well. Country is one of our modes of representation. Country is a teacher, an educator, the same as what we are. She's not always credited as being such a teacher, although we know that she has so much to offer should we just sit still and listen sometimes. Which we can forget being in the hustle and bustle of the city, again, which is why we choose that particular aspect of country rather than going somewhere 2 hours away where students are not likely to return to a lot of the time as well without having somebody else with them. So Uncle Max, you talked about the protocols. Do you want to?
Yeah, and I'll sort of reference them again. But these are the keys. It's understanding the protocols. It understands how to create relationships. So, you know, when they no longer have the staff to facilitate and support them, understanding the protocols is based on what they'll actually, how they'll engage community with new relationships. So country, as we've spoken about, is important. You know, the value system is critical because the value system is built on supporting those most in need. Myself and Marley mentioned about students with disabilities, but we really couldn't come up with it because we always looked at someone coming to us with strengths, and disabilities can be in different forms. We may not see them. So you always be prepared to look at that, and you always be prepared to be mindful of that. And that's why we have multiple staff, because the multiple staff represent the multiple levels of students. Marley engages the students at a level which is the same level. Anthony engages them at an elders sort of level because he's invested a lot more. I'm always trying to catch him up because I actually moved away when I started working. I isolated myself from my culture because I thought I had to leave it at the door to survive in a Western business. And so I'm like the older cousin. I'm the one that's trying to keep to the time where Anthony takes too long. But the students have those different layers, and those different layers are part of the protocols. You know, the reciprocity amongst us. We give them the examples, and then they see it in a real way, not just reading it from a book and trying to contextualize it through a book, but actually seeing it in real time with real people.
Yeah, and just one of the ways of doing that is, you know, the respect of, I suppose, positionality. So myself as a younger person, you know, it's so important that we give respect to our elders just by naming Uncle Max as uncle and Uncle Anthony as uncle as well. It's a very clear demonstration of positionality and strength within that and knowledge within that as well. Us young people are always dedicated to going getting cup of teas for the elders, you know, so they get to see that as part of a practice as well, and something very simple that can be implemented for themselves. But it is about the relationships. The relationships are extremely important to what we do, and it's not just about us. As Uncle Max said, it is based on reciprocity. So as much as we give all of ourselves to the students, we ask that they give that in return because we genuinely want to get to know who they are. And we typically, being that this is also an elective unit, we typically have quite small cohorts, which does allow for that more intimate connection as well for us to actually get to know everybody. And so, I suppose we put this, oh sorry, did you want to speak to that one as well?
I was just going to say a little bit, you know, because, you know, when we look at country, you know, family is everything. Family is not just, it's the animals and the plants. You know, my totem is the wage, the emu. So, you know, we sort of introduce them to those kind of relationships. Yeah, so you can go next. Yeah. And I suppose the whole reason we need to do this is because history has divided our communities. The international students will get their understanding of they may get their understanding of Aboriginal people from other sources, which actually still support this kind of division. You know, 1905 Act was actually our act in Western Australia, which actually was the assimilation and segregation, and had all these sides to it, which actually separated the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community. So this is what we're trying to work with. We're trying to rebuild relationships, and, you know, our culture was always built on relationships. You know, we allowed people to come to this country. We tried to look after these people because they were most in need. They didn't know where the water sources were. They didn't know what food they could eat, what plants they could eat. So it was built on relationships. So it's trying to come back to these relationships, which are a lot stronger, and actually sort of have those investing in these relationships who may not usually invest in the relationship, may not understand the importance, because the importance is a strong student with confidence that understands how to engage different groups of people and sort of support each other and things like that. And yeah, so that's what this is about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think understanding the why of why we're doing this. We're not just doing it because we feel that we're the best and we should be at the forefront of everything, but, not biased, but yeah, understanding the why. How did we get to this point where, you know, where we're at now, and understanding why it's important for us to be in this space together. And again, being an elective unit, we typically get students who are quite far along on their Indigenous learning journey. So some of them do come in with this knowledge. However, this for a lot of students can be a more deeper learning and a more complex learning. So particularly for our international students, they might not know some of this sort of stuff. So we feel it's really important to, as we've done with you guys today, talk a little bit about a lot about our pre-colonial history and our strengths. Talk a little bit about our colonial history and our current colonial relationship. And then we move forward into, okay, well, where do we go from here? Right, so this is where we start to talk more about our family sort of aspect. Please, feel free to take photos of this if you would like. Implement some of these language words if you feel like you would like to. Uncle Max is an expert, so he'd be more than happy to help you with this.
But we've probably covered this, how trying to rebuild that family for people that are away from their family, but also trying to rebuild that sort of how to work within that family. So it's sort of that's sort of the strength of it, and that's what I really started to notice when Anthony took over the unit, how he sort of structured it that way. Because myself, I was probably running it in a way that was more of the standard educational sort of delivery type style of mode.
I think it's also important to note we don't actually go into the classroom thinking I'm an older cousin or I'm more of a sister age. This is something that just is inherent to us. So we don't really try to implement this, but through, I suppose, understanding these Western colonial concepts, we can see how this relational versus transactional mode of working is far more beneficial than just going into the classroom, talking at a bunch of students and then letting them go to create their own ideas. Okay,
so those sort of culture, we've probably gone. I just want to make sure I get Anthony's quotes, I suppose. So like I said, it's getting the students to really understand where they're living. What is the cultural significance of the place, and when they pass it, the sort of having familiarity with what they're going to, not going away from country once in their lifetime and never going back, and so it doesn't it's not rejigged and things like that. So we go all around the city. We visit all different places, and it's sort of, like I said, the connection is always maintained because we do it we could take them away. There's another unit that takes them away for a week, and they go, there's no phone. It's so far, so isolated that. But I think this is sort of something which I think, as with the results, it sort of really does sort of make a difference. And it sort of, we've had students now coming into our other units because what they've got from this has really sort of they've really developed confidence in actually then wanting more, and I think that's sort of proof of how how well it is sort of achieved. And I think what this does too, it also builds an understanding of the culture, because if we're working in places where we look at outcomes of what this is, if you don't understand the culture, how do you understand about trauma? How do you understand about health conditions? If you don't know about the actual culture that is actually influencing the person's behaviour. So I think that's really important about this unit.
Yeah, and I think the other important aspect, which I think we actually forgot to touch on, is that this unit we typically will run throughout NAIDOC week because we also want to get students engaged in our broader community. So part of our modes of representation is not just having two or the three of us out the front of the classroom all the time. We work in the Centre for Aboriginal Studies at Curtin University, and so we have a wide variety of our teaching staff actually come in throughout the week to give their own personal perspectives on a lot of our topics, but we actually get the students engaged in the community as well. So again, it's the relational aspect, not just for us in the classroom with the students or with country, but out with the community as well. And it really gets this nice synergy going on. It's this interconnectedness of all things, right? So, students might not have felt comfortable going out to one of those community events in the past, but where they then have this knowledge of how to approach people and how to speak with respect and how to acknowledge the people in the right way, they feel more confident to actually go out and engage in their community activities, which are as much for them as they are for the celebration of our culture for us as well.
And they see the strength base of the Aboriginal culture, of Indigenous people working in roles, where it's not just reading about it in the media, because our media is pretty sort of negative. It'll sort of won't talk about 6 Indigenous doctors that are going back to their communities. They won't put anything in the paper, but then they'll put in something in regards to a break and enter or as such. I think the other thing I'll just mention before we finish up is Marley always speaks about activists. I always just say allies, but activists, because after the voice, you know, we don't stop. It's not, that's the end of it. My next sort of step is trying to generate more allies that actually then will support us when they're sitting in these offices talking about the next voice as such and things like that. So I think this is really sort of significant in developing our allies, because that's what we need as Indigenous people. We're a small percentage. We need the selfless act of non-Indigenous people to actually stand up for us, and that didn't happen with the voice, because, you know, and that's all it was. You know, the politicisation of it created other agendas, but that is basically what it was, and I think this really sort of tries to drive that.
Yeah, and I think for me it's about the activism of it. It's all well and good for you to sit there and give us the thumbs up and say, yep, I'm with you, but we only make up 3% of the population. So we really need people who are on board with us to use their voice on our behalf as well. And unfortunately, sometimes it's people that look like you're more likely to listen to. So being in the spaces and places that you guys are, it's a huge help for us if you're able to use your voice as well. And just finally, I just wanted to touch on these couple of quotes. We wanted to highlight Uncle Anthony, who is an absolutely integral part of what we do. These were just a couple of student testimonial quotes. In terms of how we measure our practice, we get students to give feedback, as we always do, but a lot of what they do is really, again, about the personal aspects of the relationships that they have with us, and particularly with these guys as elders. So.
I apologise too, the previous slide was me on the reserve I grew up on, because I still got the concrete pad, so we sort of take and see stories connect to the places, personal stories as well. But that, I think we're time too, so yeah. So thanks everyone for listening. I hope that we managed to provide some sort of assistance in maybe what you're doing in your own life, and yeah, much appreciated. Always happy to come and share knowledge. Thank you.
Max, Marley, thank you so much. You've given me a lot to think about, engaging with local pedagogies, how to teach and learn through country, and also thinking about creative ways of measuring impact that aren't just about metrics. So thank you so much. I look forward to continuing some conversations.